All right. So for my statistics project, I decided to do the project that says go to a local grocery store and collect the data for at least 75 breakfast cereals. The name, grams of sugar per serving, and shelf location, the bottom, middle, or top. Group the data by cereal location and use 3 box plots to compare sugar content by shelf location, and then comment on your findings. So I did that. I did just that. And I did a stratified random sampling by splitting up the cereals into 3 sections by shelf location and then collecting the data I decided to do 25 cereals from the top, 25 from the bottom, and then 25 from the middle. So yeah, and so that was my project. And so I did that. I went to Ralph's and did that sampling. It's funny because at one point I was working on the project and I had my binder and my piece of paper, was writing it down, and a lady that works there was walking by and was like, "Oh, you doing homework?" And I was like, "Yes, ma'am." So it's just funny to know that they know that this is kind of like a typical project to do for statistics. So I just wanted to go through my project. So on the assignment, it said to create box plots. So I did box plots on each one. So here's my top box plot, my middle box plot, and my bottom box plot, as well as I did histograms because for me that helps me visually see the information better. So here's my top, middle, and then bottom histograms. I also did, when I was collecting my data, I want to show you, I made a table with everything. So here are all my cereal names along with the sugars and then the locations of each so you can tell. One of the issues I ran into while doing my project was that a lot of cereals were spread out. So even some cereals were on the top, middle, and bottom shelves, all based on size. So I noticed a lot of the time the family size was on the bottom, or even the same cereal, same size box, everything was on the top shelf and the middle shelf. And so I kind of had to decide am I going to put it in the top or middle, which could have inserted some biases, but I tried to make it as random as I possibly could. So yeah, and so my main findings in this, I noticed that first of all for the top that it was mostly a unimodal histogram, and it was somewhat negatively or left skewed. It also contains a gap, as you can tell right here. To a certain degree, you can tell it's negatively skewed, but at the same time, the information over here kind of throws it off. And then for the middle one, the histogram is also unimodal, right here, or modal. I probably have been saying it wrong. And it's also somewhat negatively or left skewed, but it, as I said with the other one, it also contains a gap. So that's kind of an abnormality. But overall, both, obviously the middle can be approximate, or it can obviously be seen that it's not bell-shaped, so it's not approximately normal, and the same with the top. And then for the bottom, also unimodal. It is not positively or negatively skewed, but it doesn't have any outliers or gaps. I forgot to mention on the middle one, there were 2 outliers that are represented by these dots right here. And then I also did the equation for that down in my project to show how I calculated, as well as looking at this box plot, as well as how I calculated the outliers. Overall, I noticed that, here we go, the top shelf mostly contained cereals that had between 10 and 13 grams of sugar, as you can see indicated by this unimodal, I don't know what to call it, bar. I also noticed that compared to the middle and bottom shelf, the top shelf had the most cereals that had less than 10 grams of sugar. So as you can see, all of these had a lot of the less than 10 grams, but over here it's just not as many. Especially you can see that with the bottom shelf. So then with the middle shelf, it mostly the same thing as the top, mostly contains cereals between 10 and 13 grams of sugar. But it also had a lot of cereals that range from 5 to 10, as you can see in this area. there were barely any cereals that had less than 10 grams of sugar or more than 13 grams of sugar, which explains why there were outliers. Um, and then for the bottom shelf mostly contained cereals that had between 10 and 13 grams of sugar. But compared to the top and the middle shelves, the bottom shelf had more cereals that had less than 10 grams of sugar than more than, and then, okay, so it had less than 10 grams of sugar cereals and more than 13, as you can see from less and more. And then overall, I mainly concluded that most cereals had between 10 and 13 grams of sugar, no matter what shelf they were on. It was interesting just going through the different cereals, and a lot of them I was surprised by how much sugar was in them, even if they were considered the healthy ones. I also noticed that the most popular cereals were placed on the middle shelf, which I'm assuming is a marketing tactic. The family size ones were on the bottom, like I said before, which is like, that makes sense too, because you don't need to have the biggest sizes portrayed in the top or the middle shelves. Overall, it was a great project. So thank you so much for listening.